survivors, and welcome to First Aid Sprague, a Resident Evil podcast by fans for fans. This is episode 96 of the show, and we're heading into the deepest recesses of Resident Evil with book club Biohazard Rose Blank. My name is Sai, and joining me on the panel this week, he's got something in common with Rose Blank. He was also chosen by a committee to be here. It's Moist Outlet, aka James.
What is going on?
And we're all going to be heartbroken to find out that this podcast is all just a VR simulation inside of his head. It's Fire Button Steve Valance.
I had to read that sentence 4 times. What?
Every episode of First Aid Sprague is recorded live on Discord, so join our server now to become part of our fantastic community that includes Resident Evil diehards and newbies. If you like, you can support the show via our merchandise store or over at patreon.com/FA Sprague pod for as little as $1 a month. All of this and all of our social media links can be found at our website, faspraguepod.com. A little bit of housekeeping at the top of the show. We've got a couple of thank yous on this episode, actually. Thank you to Ghost Twisted, and thank you to Wade Winston Wilson, Deadpool himself, I think. Thank you to both of those people and all of our patrons for supporting First Aid Spray this month. We've had some new stuff out since the last episode. Quite a few things have gone on. The first one being a major one. We released a project we'd sort of lightly talked about and teased, which is every Resident Evil file read by the community. All the files from the 2002 remake of Resident Evil, spearheaded by Steve and I, and read by a selection of wonderful people, voice actors from the internet, previous First Aid Spray guests, some special guests as well. It is out on our YouTube feed. Please do check it out. It's kind of the logical evolution of the file readings from the podcast to do something like that, and it was a lot of fun, and almost certainly we'll do another one at some point in the future. And speaking of my illustrious colleagues, they also recently played through all of Kuon, and you can watch episodes 1 and 2 of From Software's little known horror game now over on First Aid Plays, with more to come because they have finished the game, so those are just going to kind of steadily drop over the next few weeks. Speaking of dropping in the next few weeks, just a quick note, if you listen on Spotify, and I don't think this is affected anywhere else, but Spotify gave us a bit of a sort of finger wag this week, and we've had to remove some episodes of the podcast from the feed due to copyright claims. Mostly it's now That's What I Call Survival Horror, as you would expect for use in music, but it did also affect a couple of other episodes, which I'm going to go and trim and re-upload. So if you're looking for Box Art Study 2 or the Ada Wong profile for whatever reason, that's where they're gone. But more so to explain, when they do re-upload in the coming weeks, it is just a trim or a slight change to see if we can make sure they're up there, because in the case where it's like the music unused under a file reading, that's kind of tragic if we have to cut it out. So I'm going to take a moment and try and re-upload the episode and save the hard work of the voice actor and of us. It was a great episode. Also, just one last note on the removal of those episodes, that will just affect podcast feeds and maybe just Spotify feeds, specifically in terms of now That's What I Call Survival Horror. All that stuff will still be on YouTube. All of our stuff will still be on YouTube. So if you're looking for that show or anything else, it will be on there in its original format, if you like. But that's everything from us. Steve, take us into the headlines.
Okay, so the only news story this time. Zack Cregger gives the first official details on the new Resident Evil movie.
I think this is like 3 for 3 on podcasts where we talked about this recently, but they are, as we've said before, making a big deal of this film, even though it's going to be like a year and a half away. At least right now, I'm sure it will die down, but as we're kind of like in the announcement period, we're getting information and stuff. There is obviously rumours and leaks about casting and plot synopsis, but in terms of the official line, Zack Cregger has said, "My movie will be built in the spirit of those original games and follows one central protagonist from point A to point B." That's about all we have officially speaking, but we do also know via a different interview with Deadline that Zack Cregger is getting paid $20 million to direct the picture, and for context, Welcome to Raccoon City's budget was $25 million. So all of our conversations recently about this being Sony and Constantine and everyone else really putting some chips behind this one to hope that it pays off. That, I think, is proof positive of the case. I don't know if you guys have any more to say on this movie that's still a year and a half away. Steve, any thoughts at the moment?
I've finally seen Barbarian. And
yeah?
it was okay. Yeah, I would say that I enjoyed it more when the mystery wasn't fully revealed. But yeah, that was okay. So if it can keep up to the level of quality of the first half of that film, we should be in for a fun time.
I still need to watch it. I should probably watch it. I've got a year and a half, right? So I might as well watch it at some point. James, any more different thoughts or feelings based on that plot synopsis or anything else?
Not really. Every time I hear Zack Cregger's name, though, Cregger, I always think of that line from Zed in Men in Black where he says, "We don't have an intergalactic Cregger over here." You know? Do you know what I mean?
Zack Cregger.
Yeah, intergalactic Zack Cregger.
An intergalactic yeah. You can even say it like Will Smith does back to him in a sarcastic way.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we're doing. Yeah, definitely. But yeah, it always reminds me of that. But yeah, I watched Barbarian when it first came out and really loved it. But yeah, it's the same thing as it. I am going to be sitting on the fence until I actually hear news, because right now all we're hearing is words, and every time we kind of rely on words, we're always disappointed because we're always told it's going to be like the originals, or we're going to be following, the original. It's going to
return to its roots.
Yeah. And it never is. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, like another quote that he said was, "It would be unlike any of the previous films." But again, in what way? Like, that is just a selection of words. We've had so much of that before. I'm the biggest fan and all this stuff that I'm with you. Like, I need to see it to get excited. The sort of rumours doing the round about the plot synopsis, I won't go into, obviously, because we don't talk about that kind of thing on this podcast. But if you're interested in it, I'm sure you can Google it and find it. It's been everywhere in the last couple of weeks. If that is sort of what we can expect, then I'm open-minded in general, but I'm hoping that is the direction we go. But we won't speak on it until we know any more official stuff like this as it comes through. But that's going to be it in terms of the news. Very svelte time as always in Resident Evil right now. So we're going to move on to the main subject of this episode of First Aid Sprague, which is Book Club Rose Blank. And now, reading selected excerpts from Biohazard Rose Blank's English translation, hosted at crimson-head.com, Vin Ada, who you can find at twitch.tv/Vin Ada.
So why are you here? Emily asked pointedly. What do you really want to ask me? I want to know how you found our institute, Mr. Fuchs. I already know who you are. You're a speculator. They seek and disseminate unpleasant information about companies and manipulate the stock market. Fuchs raised his eyebrows and looked at Emily in astonishment. Look, you seem really well informed. Did you do the research alone? Although I worked almost the whole night, I got up early this morning and researched a bit on the net. It obviously paid off. Am I to believe there's something on the net about me? Did you find something right away with the search engine? Yes, the problem of privacy protection in the age of the internet. Where is this going? Emily stared at his contemptuous smile. I had access to the corporate headquarters database and was looking for information about business lines that we have. I have reviewed all of your accomplishments, Richard Fuchs. The smear campaigns at 28 companies, including 5 pharmaceutical companies, are associated with the name Richard Fuchs. These companies are huge conglomerates and have branches all over the world. 4 companies, of which 1 month before they were accused, had record high layoffs. The ideal time to buy pharmaceutical stocks from other companies. Of course, a single article can have no such impact on the course of things. It takes further, profound research. And it seems clear that this be the kind of thing that goes beyond the scope of an individual's activity. Yes, even that of an organization. The system behind this manipulation is disguised as multiple organizations operating on an international network. Fuchs stopped the dictation machine on the table and took a deep breath. And you? Your conclusion is? Emily paused and looked around. Selfridge and Sprague had their heads up and looked at her intently. Mafia, Emily said. Selfridge and Fuchs looked at each other. Sprague was stunned watching Emily's profile. Fuchs' shoulders twitched. He chuckled, and that chuckle quickly became roaring laughter. Selfridge also joined in. Even Sprague could hardly resist it. He bit his lip, his muscles shaking slightly. At that moment, Emily wanted nothing more than to just leave this room behind. After more than a minute, Fuchs wiped the tears from his eyes and said, "I see, I understand. If so, what are you going to do? Call the police? The stooge of a crime syndicate is here. Will you tell them that?" "They don't understand. They'll be eliminated as soon as you've been exposed as an enemy of this group." "I know. In fact, Umbrella is an underworld organization that creates weird weapons. And this is a biological weapons testing center. If anyone here does not understand something, it's you, Miss Ron. You will not get me out of the way. I am currently a member of this group. I was hired by some big shareholders to come here." Both elbows propped on the table, he spread his hands. "I wanted to slow down the conversation, but now it looks like we could get right to the point."
It's a return to book club in a most unexpected of ways. I did a little bit of a Google, just in general, for general research about Biohazard Rose Blank, and man, it really proves how undercovered this piece of media is, that our social media posts announcing this podcast was on like the second page of Google. Like, there is not a lot on the internet about this book. So I'm really excited to talk about it because it is such a strange oddity, such an under-discussed oddity. And I guess the first thing we need to say is a thank you to the guys over at Crimson Head, crimsonhead.com, or crimson-head.com, sorry, for the English translation of this, and a special thank you in particular to BSA Arkley, Joseph Natal, the Oracle Dragon, and USS Command, and of course web host and good friend of the podcast, George Trevor, as well. We wouldn't have been able to do this episode without the English translation of Rose Blank. But what is Rose Blank, you might be asking? It is one of two books, very strange entries into the Resident Evil universe, as they're not directly produced by Capcom or under Capcom in any way, but they were approved by the company. They were part of a competition called the Biohazard Grand Novel Prize in 2001. Guidelines for the competition were largely based around the sort of length of the book rather than anything else. Entrants were pretty much free to set their stories anywhere in the Resident Evil universe in any fashion, starring any characters that they might like to include, even going so far as to adapting previous games if that's what you wanted to do. The committee that judged the entrance into this competition consisted of Shinji Mikami, the head of Flagship and sort of lead Resident Evil lore analyst, sort of the head of lore, the Lord of Lore, there you go, Lore Lord, Yoshiki Okamoto, and some extra judges were writers and magazine editors. Rose Blank specifically was written by Tadashi Aizawa. It was one of the two big winners alongside To the Liberty, and both of these were chosen to be novelised in Japan as a result, with the third place, The Black Winged Resident, being published in Dengeki HP magazine. Both Rose Blank and To the Liberty were published on the 25th of March 2002 exclusively in Japan, but then they got German translations in 2006. Interestingly, the German versions were numbered 8 and 9, respectively, sort of to imply that they were part of S.D. Perry's books that we've all previously covered as well. And in Germany, the 0 Hour book, unlike in English, which is numbered as 0, is book 7. So Rose Blank is book 8, and To the Liberty is book 9. No English translation, officially speaking, exists, like I say. So you can go and read this now over at crimson-head.com. I appreciate that a lot of people won't know much about Rose Blank at all. I imagine we didn't know a lot going into it. So we'll do our best to sort of explain what the heck it is, as well as our own thoughts about it. But first things first, it's a book club episode. Let's talk about the artwork on the front of the books, and in this case, the artwork in the books. There are two covers, obviously, because the book was only published in two different places, the Japanese cover and the German cover. Steve, any feelings on the covers for Rose Blank?
Oh, well, generally speaking, the Japanese cover, as per usual, like it comes out a lot stronger, mainly because there's a giant rose on it and the silhouette of a, I want to say zombie, but it could be something else. Like it
Right.
could be, it could literally be just a person that's described in the novel. But it also has a silvery, watery kind of backdrop, which is relevant because there's something in this novel that is of a silvery, watery nature. Unfortunately, the German version is, let's just take some renders from Resident Evil 2 and Code Veronica and then chuck a rose on them and it's not quite as in step, you know. So yeah, the Japanese one pretty strong. The actual art inside it itself, I think, is more interesting, captivating. It's not quite anime, but you can tell it's got anime influence. But also distinct silhouettes to the point where I could tell who most of the characters are meant to be. And generally speaking, no real issues. It feels like these are characters, at least visually, could exist in the world of Resident Evil.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I think it's really interesting that you say that sort of silhouette on the Japanese cover could be a creature or a person from this book. It could also be something from To the Liberty, because both of these books actually have that on the front. They both have that strange silhouette. They both have Biohazard off on an angle. So it might just be a non-specific sort of, here's a beastie for the front of both of these books. I don't actually know. The German one is, you say, not in step. I feel like it is in step, ironically, with the 2012 re-releases of the S.D. Perry books, many years ahead of that being the case. But obviously when we did the Perryverse, every single episode we'd start with, here are the covers. The 2012 one sucks because it's just like a PNG from the games on the same backdrop. And this does feel similar to that, where you're right, it's just, of all things, the misty artwork from Resident Evil 2, a Remake 1 render, and a Code Veronica zombie artwork, all in different sort of states of darkness, essentially. It's not very good. I don't think either of them are particularly great, personally. James, how do you feel about the artwork on and in the book?
So I'll talk about the bad one first, and that's the German one. Like they've just put Misty on there, like put darkness down, and then put like a white stroke on it, like, or a drop
Little
shadow.
alpha glow.
Yeah, and like the other two are just like, it's like they've found two zombies and just put the saturation all the way down, like, and they just slapped it on. Like, it's really, you know,
Graphic
it's
design. It is their passion.
It's my passion. Yeah, it's really bad.
Knocking off early is my passion.
Yeah, and like it doesn't like. I feel like, and I'll get onto the Japanese one because I actually really like it for some reason, for some other reasons. But I feel like a book cover should tell you a little bit about the book that's inside it. Like the story, and that cover just doesn't tell you anything. And if you look at that cover, yeah, sure, it's got a rose on it, and yeah, a rose is a symbol in it, but that's it. Like the centerpiece of it is these three zombies that are not in this.
Yeah.
So like it just makes no sense. The Japanese one, though, the rose, I think they could have done something a little bit more unique with. But the background, it reminds me of the, not to spoil the whole thing, but you probably know about this story if you're listening to this or you've read it recently. But it kind of reminds me of the end. The very end of the book. Where you see Rose trying to get to the moon, and it kind of gives me like moonlight, kind of starry night sky in the background there. So I'm wondering if they worked with that. That's why I feel like they could have done something quite unique with the rose and kind of just carried on with that motif, with what they've got in the background. Instead of just making an obvious rose and just slapping a rose on there.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I like for that reason. It invokes like more thought. The shadow, I have no idea. It looks like Riff Raff from Rocky Horror.
Rocky Horror.
Like a side profile of him, right? But other than that, yeah, I don't know what to really say about that silhouette because yeah, it just, again, there isn't anyone like that in this. So, the descriptions in this, Aizawa doesn't like describing people very much. I've noticed throughout this story, so I'm not really sure who that's meant to be. But yeah, the cover I like way more than the German one. But let's say the Western one.
Yeah. In terms of the drawings inside, I can be quite positive here. I quite like the stuff that's in the book. They sort of have a strange, timeless quality to them because they're not the style of 2002,
Anime
really
now.
popular at that time. Yeah, when you talk about the anime look, it feels more sort of, 90s or 80s even. It's not really my sort of knowledge base, but The non-coloured ones kind of feel like they've been done quite quickly, but that's not a criticism for me. It makes it actually feel like this is sort of an unearthed sort of journal. There was like, here's the story, and here are some sketches of the people that were involved. So for me, it actually really fits the vibe and even the story of the book to a certain extent. And the colour stuff that is there, yeah, I think it's really nice. And the fact that I was able to go, okay, those are these 4 central characters. I guess they're sort of separate characters enough where I could just be like, okay, this is this guy because he's the business guy. This is this guy because he's got long hair. Like, it's simple enough, but it worked. Where I was like, okay, this helps. James, what did you think of the stuff inside the book?
I liked that because as you're reading this, you know when you get into close to the end of a chapter because you get one of these illustrations, and I love the art, but I like their placement in the story because every time these illustrations are put up at the end of a chapter, it's after you've spoken to a new character that has kind of gone in a new direction in a way. Like with Emily, like the first one, Steve just put it, like the very strict kind of, haircut, short hair. That was one of the first you see, other than the title. And I was like, oh, that's Emily. Okay, now I know what Emily looks like,
right.
And like, later there, Richard Fuchs there, like later on, like you see him and Emily kind of talk in the room, and then that image comes up. You're like, oh, so that's Richard Fuchs. Like, you know who that is. And then it gets a bit weird and wild later on, but they still fit, and they're very awesome. Like, I liked how esoteric they are, and I'm going to say that word a lot, by the way.
Yeah, it's a good word.
Right, because this entire story is so esoteric, it's wild. But the images fit the narrative as you're reading, which I think is cool. You don't see that in books a lot, like novels. It was nice to experience. And kind of, I really like the last one, which is like the screaming zombie. Yeah, that one. Thank you, Steve. Like the side profile of the screaming zombie. It reminds me of a lot of older kind of 80s horror anime stuff. Yeah, like Steve just said, put in the chat, a bit berserky. It does, like, very sketchy, and they've even like on the chin they've put like small drops of like saliva or blood that's coming off. There's a lot to see in a very simple image. And these are all fairly simple, like as images go, but they're also they look so good, timeless, and I would love to see full like color illustrations of these. My favorite, if we can choose favorites if we want, like I think my favorite might be the one of the woman kind of putting a hand over what looks like another person, or like I think that's meant to be Rose putting her hand over maybe Alan, maybe,
right,
potentially,
maybe,
or maybe Kanuda, like I don't, or Kanuda, but I like that because it's like that's what she's been doing, or that's what they've been doing. This entire story is kind of bringing people in and absorbing them. And I think that happens around, like, you see this image around that point in the story too. Yeah, the pictures tell a lot of the story. I like that.
So we're going to go through the story from start to finish. The story does only have 7 chapters, a prologue and an epilogue. So we're going to break it up. We're going to talk about the prologue and then just like a group of chapters. So what I'll do is kind of read a summary of each section that we're about to talk about. Because again, as I appreciate, this is hard to follow when you have read the book, especially what part we're going to be talking about specifically. But most people listening to this, good chance that some of you, if not most of you, have never read Rose Blank. So in order to give you sort of context, please bear with me trying to read through what has amounted to over 2,000 words that I wrote the other night to kind of give an explanation of what the heck is going on, basically. So let's talk about the prologue. Our story starts with Rena Mitford walking through a virtual reality simulation of forested mountains in Guatemala. She's a VR technician at an Umbrella lab. As she calmly explores, she begins to hear something, shouting and chaos. She attempts to pull up the virtual keyboard, and instead, the VR simulation around her changes, and a city comes into view, burning houses, overturned cars, cannibalism on the streets. Meanwhile, scientist Emily Ran, in the lab, hears the VR room's siren that warns that a subject has been submerged for too long. She pulls Rena out of the giant VR simulation cube with the assistance of the lab AI Carmen, and Rena, shaken, grabs Emily and blankly states, "Alma is in the VR simulation. I am Alma," over and over again. James, you're the one that said, hey, let's talk about the prologue as a separate thing. And it's a good thing to do because, like, this is our first sort of impression of this book. How do we feel about it hooking us? And did we all do the same thing where we went, oh my God, they mentioned Cornwall, England in a Resident Evil piece of media. Just randomly once at the beginning of this book, and it has no relevance. It's just, Rena was from Cornwall. Okay, cool. James, how did you feel about this as a hook?
Yeah, I liked this prologue because... Like I'm gonna say that the E word again. I love how weird it is, esoteric. Like the beginning of this, like there's no descriptors, there's no setup. It's just here's the weird. Like there's just a lot of wild phrases. There's a lot of it making no sense, but at the same time, like there's these buzzwords that tie you to the writing of the world, such as Cornwall, VR, Guatemala. Like. I also think this is the last time as well that we see Rena Mitford like with a conscious mind or conscious brain.
Yeah. Yes, it's the only time, I think.
Yeah, like, which makes the start and prologue hit really hard as you're witnessing like the beginning of the outbreak from page 1 without even realizing it. Like you're seeing it in front of you. It's also the part of the book that I felt most connected to at first from a Western mind, like because you're essentially only introduced to these two characters, and one of them is really fleeting in Emily, and it invited me to find out more. I really liked the beginning because of that. It kept me engaged. But yeah, that's all I had to say about it. Just how weird it was. But I also loved it because it was so strange.
It's a really, really good point, actually. I hadn't thought about this before until you started talking about it, but it kind of reminds me of all things, for everyone out there who may have read / possibly more likely watched The Expanse. It kind of reminds me how that show begins with a character who is sort of a central figure in the story, and the sort of core mystery about season 1 of The Expanse is about this character. But that's like her one lead scene is to sort of set up the story at the beginning, and then it kind of moves over to our actual protagonists, even though she's like at the core of the mystery. And that's very much the case with Rena and what sort of begins to happen here. Also, to be fair, you're absolutely right. There's a bunch of stuff here, and it sets up a bunch of questions, or even teases a bunch of questions. We don't even really start getting into them at all at this point. But also, because it's Resident Evil and and then suddenly the VR simulation went terribly wrong and there was a burning city and cannibalism on the streets, you go, I know what that is. So you go, okay, this is related to Raccoon City in some fashion. I'm kind of curious how this ties together, why Raccoon City and so on and so forth. And I don't think we have a date. I don't think we ever get a year explicitly in the book, although it's very heavily implied, obviously, when this takes place. Steve, what did you think of the prologue?
It's, the fact that it starts grounded in unreality, but you're not like fully aware straight away.
Yeah.
And odd descriptors for things kind of make it all very, very strange and whimsical. And then when you finally twig that she's in a VR suit doing things, it's not long after that it all goes to pot, and then she's panicking. And it's genuinely hard for my brain to initially parse because of just I don't know, but. Once I'd got through it enough times, it became very interesting because it isn't like Star Trek's holodeck. You're in like a water submerged tank, aren't you? In like sensory deprivation with a headset on.
Yeah.
So when she's talking about how the air is almost like a water-like viscosity.
Viscosity.
Yeah, that word that Sai said that I'm rubbish at saying.
Viscosity.
Initial glance, it's like, I'm on sentence 1 and my brain's already pudding. But no, it slowly finds a way to worm into you. And it was I'm still trying to figure out how Rena, how they, shall we say, expire. Because spoilers for people who haven't read Rose Blank. This is probably like my colleagues have said, this is the only time we really see any kind of personality. She's basically sneaking in after hours to use it, isn't she? To see, look around in Guatemala's like visual, looking at forests and things. It doesn't kind of make fully clear as to what happens, other than when Emily comes find her, and then it's like, I am Alma. So.
I think the only kind of notification you get is Emily a couple of times mentions we're taking care of it. My point is, I feel like the main inciting, like, I don't know what you would call it, mental overriding or brainwashing or whatever. It kind of appears off screen, and I realize that'd be a hard thing to parse in text. But I kind of feel like it's the one thing the prologue kind of needed as a hook for me, having read everything. But as a starting gun to what's going to happen, it's still very intriguing.
Right. So we're going to talk about chapters 1 and 2 together as sort of the setup before we get into the bulk of the story. So I will now try to sum up the first 2 chapters of the book. We start actually going the prologue in a third person. We now switch to first person perspective of a woman in Raccoon City, Alma Hartline, lamenting the issues with the town and her own life. On a train, she's approached by a woman without a face, who, despite having no mouth, demands to know who she is. Alma is the daughter of Umbrella employees. Her mother has passed and her father is sick. She lives out of her grandfather's old pawn shop, a treasure trove of mysterious objects he's given false backstories to. One item in the shop is an old Peacemaker handgun. Elsewhere, it's October 3rd of an undated year, presumably, and I've put this here just as my own speculation, 1998. And single mother and Umbrella lead scientist Emily Ran is made aware of the upcoming arrival of Richard Fuchs to the Guatemalan lab, a place so secret that its employees don't know its exact location and are pretty much boxed in by the layout of the building itself. They see like a square of sky from the forecourt, and that's essentially it. Fuchs is considered a reporter, and this is poor timing considering the Rena accident in the prologue, and also the fact that a skinned cow has been inexplicably found dumped in the water storage tank. Emily, Institute Director Ren Sprague, I think we decided, hence First Aid Sprague. Everyone who's still questioning that intro, sorry. Should have got to that sooner. Ren welcome. Sprague. Hiromo Kanuta and Ulysses Alam, who is the security head and the lover of Rena Mitford, discuss the cow incident. It's theorized that it might be intentional sabotage by an outside party, but Ulysses suggests that it might be an employee playing a prank. In chapter 2, Emily and Kanuta talk about work, and the latter asks Emily if the rumours that Rose, a component of the VR machine, is a survivor of Raccoon City. Emily doesn't know anything about this. To her, Rose is merely data. Emily ponders that Rena couldn't operate the VR machine by herself, and that Ulysses, as her lover, perhaps had a hand in things, pondering why he would have left her there to eventually perhaps drown. In the Institute's conference room, Emily meets with Sprague, management advisor Christian Selfridge, and Richard Fuchs. There's tension in the air as Fuchs asks about the Institute's AI, Carmen, asks the group if there's a risk of an outbreak, and Emily makes a wild accusation that Fuchs is a member of the Mafia, coming to leverage Umbrella to harm their stock market position. Fuchs gets serious, tells everyone that Umbrella stock is in free fall, its military is turning away from it, and that the, quote, middleman have been brought to light. Following the meeting, Emily paces the Institute courtyard and all of the lights go out. She bumps into guard Simon Beach and his dog Toby. They suspect a biohazard has occurred. Meanwhile, Fuchs is on a phone call to someone talking about distracting everyone. He asks this person about Rose and is convinced to look in the tank to see her, where he finds it apparently empty, just kind of liquid. Meanwhile, Alma takes a bus trip through Alma, the first-person perspective character, takes a bus trip through Raccoon City. The scene shifts from the bus to a meeting at her school with Mr. Kirkwood. It shifts again to Alma's friend Alex, and the two are approached by the Vigilante Stars members who are verbally abused by some others at the school. And then we shift again to Alma having sex with her friend Frank, and then we're back on the bus. It's all a very disorienting sort of section of the book, very much intentionally. How did we feel about chapters 1 and 2, sort of the first third of the story? There is, I guess, a lot to get into here, admittedly, but James, what were your points? How you feel about the sort of first act?
So I think we all struggled. Like there was a
yes,
like,
that's fair.
Yeah, there was the setup was difficult because the prologue was really strong. Like the beginning of chapter 1, it's again starts with all this weird stuff, and that's like a constant throughout the novel. Every time you get to the beginning of a chapter, you're always going to get a lot of strange stuff that makes no sense, but then like these kind of notifiers or key points that you're going to understand where they come from, but none of it makes sense yet. But yeah, it becomes the norm throughout the novel. And another read through really helped me understand what was happening almost. As with my first pass over, I was mega confused, chapter 1 and 2. These like the start chapters, they introduce you. I think this was my biggest issue. It introduces you to an incredibly large cast, straight away. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's something that I really struggled with due to them also all having very similar names. Like you got Selfridge, First Aid Sprague, Ran, they're all very similar. And at the time, and because we weren't getting descriptions from Aizawa, it was really hard for me to figure out who these people were. So I had to actually make a note later on. I think in a later chapter, it gives them all a role, what their role is at the Institute. So I had to actually make a note of that down. So in my second read through, I knew who they all were. So I had to do homework to read this book, which was strange. I do think the chapters do a good job of introducing you to the world, albeit after some kind of exposition. I've put a note, you'd think we'd be fed up of all the stock crashing stuff since the Paul W.S. Anderson films. But I think being explained it through a board meeting and with the folks on the ground, as it were, it actually linked me to that event itself much more than a monologue by Alice. And just dissolve transitions constantly leading to nuclear explosions. It was way nicer to see it in a boardroom. But yeah, I think that my biggest issue with these first couple of chapters, and maybe I could have missed something, but I've read this twice now and I still don't understand it. And it really threw me where the cow scene. I didn't get a sense of urgency from anyone. Yeah. If a cow was found in a water supply that was supplying the entire institute, an isolated location, I would expect more urgency. But to me, it felt like it fit the narrative of Alan's betrayal, way too conveniently. It was nobody was in a rush. It's there's this skinned cow in your water supply, guys. And nobody was I would be losing. I mean, I'd be losing my mind. Maybe that's why I shouldn't work at the institute. But I feel like everybody should be. But yeah,
beef water.
The thing is, they were talking about it, and they're oh, sure, that's weird. It's why are more questions not being asked about this cow?
There is one line from Sprague which kind of is meant to explain it away, and he describes the water tank as interposed. So I assume that, hey, we have a barrier between what's in here and what gets to us. So there's no immediate concern. We'll just figure this out in the meantime. But you're right. There was a lack of this is really messed up. and people go not asking, are we in danger? Not just in an immediate sense from a skinned cow dumped in your water, but also the fact that how does this get here? Like you're meant to be a top secret lab. Something like this happens should be a big question about security.
yeah, it was very odd. On the other hand, though, you're also introduced to Richard Fuchs, who is clearly meant to be a red herring. Like for the first few chapters, like for me, he like Aizawa was trying to make him out to like, oh, is he a baddie or isn't he? Oh, he's definitely a baddie. Not in that way, but yeah, smoke and mirrors, etc. Like I liked him. I liked his inclusion. And also Emily's constant suspicion of him, like that reveal that she thought he was part of the mafia was hilarious. Like that was really funny. And yeah, I liked also that he wasn't technically a good guy, but he wasn't as bad as the as the characters in the book thought he was, and as bad as the characters in the book were, which was quite a cool revelation that we learn that as you read through. But yeah, that's for later chapters.
I definitely, as I said, disoriented was a big word for this. And obviously it's harder because we're reading a fan translation, and again, we're glad it exists, of Japanese to English, but there are parts where it just doesn't translate all that comfortably. And that was obviously a factor as well, where it's like, let me just reread this again to just try and pass what's confusing me here. Is it the translation? Is it the writing? Or is this book just kind of obtuse and weird and trying to disorient me in some cases? Like the whiplash that you get going from third to first to third person repeatedly throughout this is really wild. It's obviously the point. It's quite unique. And I think it does a good job of displaying the strangeness of the VR world. And it's relevant to the plot that it's kind of in first person, because there is a big, conversation about the word I and what identity is and stuff like that. But the bus journey where I felt, I assumed Alma got off at the school or whatever and has a meeting with the teacher. Because sometimes in books, we just kind of cut from one scene to the other if we're heading in that direction. But then suddenly you're outside, and then suddenly you're rolling around in the grass. And I was suddenly going, wait a minute, we're just like morphing from scene to scene? Okay. And it was one of those things that made sense later with context. And one of those things where when I read through it the first time, I had so many questions about this book. And I didn't write down the little synopsis stuff that I just read there and will be reading more of. But on a second sort of skim through to sum things up, that really helped me understand things better the second time around. That said, there was still a bunch of stuff that my first reaction, my gut reaction, I still stand by. Emily sort of suddenly realising a chapter or two in that Rena couldn't operate the machine by herself feels very silly, because that should be the first question that somebody asks about, what is she doing in here and no one's around. The explanation of what the tank is for, which I haven't really touched on, it's basically a place to simulate viral decoding so they can search for a vaccine to the T virus in a safe environment. That's kind of cool. That, for me, was kind of the first moment where I was like, okay, this feels like Resident Evil. Like, we're in a completely detached place from the rest of the canon or anything else that we've done, with a whole group of new characters with a different perspective. But that felt like it fit, even though it's sci-fi craziness by 1998 standards, even in the Resident Evil universe, which has always pushed it a little bit. That felt like, okay, there's some sense to this. And my last sort of note on chapter 1 and 2 is that the meeting scene that you mentioned, James, is great. Like, there's a really unique tension and guessing game angle to the whole thing. Characters genuinely feel like they're waiting to see who makes the next move, and sort of nervous about what each other is saying. Even colleagues sort of looking sideways at each other about what they're sort of revealing to Fuchs and who they think he is. There is a lot of implication here about Umbrella and its benefactors and how they can factor in bringing it down if it's going to harm them. And even some implication here about the US government, which is crazy, and the kind of stuff that we've longed for in Resident Evil. And it's strangely in this little fan fiction book that got published by Capcom, we've never had this kind of insight into the daily lives of Umbrella people before. It's usually just laughing, maniacal, I made a virus and now I'm going to stick it in myself, idiots. But this was so refreshing. Also, at this particular moment, if we're to believe, and I think we are, that this is days after Raccoon City, literally 2 days after Raccoon City has taken place, which does become a bit of a problem maybe when you try and time out the story here. But, you know, it's all about to go horribly wrong for Umbrella, and to get sort of in the centre of that, the rumours between colleagues about what's going on and the uncertainty of it all. This, if you were to read up to this scene and stop, I mean, you shouldn't do that because it's a really interesting book. But this is a really early, really high point for me, this whole scene. Steve, what did you think of chapter 1 and 2?
Well, like a lot of the Alma sequences, very dream logic-y, as is the point, where you're shifting and morphing. Now I know what the general gimmick is. It's easier to pass, but initially very hard to read. So if you're reading this or trying to read this after the podcast, bear in mind you may have to give it a few or three readings over before it really sinks in. It's interesting because this chapter it does introduce us with the principal characters, and Emily, she kind of feels like a nicer Annette.
Yeah, right.
You know,
100%.
Also a strange daughter, for whatever reason, names the AI after her parents' pet name for their grandchild. Strange, but okay, fair enough. And initial viewing, you think that Ren Sprague, however we're pronouncing it, he seems like
First Aid Sprague, Steve.
First Aid Sprague. He seems like a bit of a goofball.
Yeah.
He's got his little rocket pen, and he's not like for the lead like guy in the building. He's kind of a clown. And then you've got the incident with the cow. I'm with James that there's no way I am not like getting myself tested that day. Like
Yeah.
for why have we drank cow water? You know. Am I now part Oxo Cube? You know, I want to know. I won't be able to hand wave away. It's like, you've got Ulysses going, it's probably a prank. Someone might have snuck it in late hour. It might be an activist or something. Like, no, this is a serious security breach. And 2, we've been drinking all this water. There is a significant... but that by, it's interesting the tension's building. There's a lot of emphasis put on the atrium and the layout of this building, and to my mind's eye, if you imagine like a 3x3 like set of blocks, and then the middle the middle is cut out. That's what this feels like, just like a solid cube of a place, and then the middle's an atrium, and that's where Emily goes to smoke, the only smoker in the building. So clearly popular with her colleagues because she stinks the place out. Yeah, it's nice that, despite the dream logic sequence with Alma earlier, that you get this matter of perspective, I feel like, but I still can't place where the rooms are individually from one another.
No, totally.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
I have a question for all of us mega lore nerds. Right, Alma's meant to be a daughter of Umbrella employees. Is this meant to be the Alma from the My Dearest Alma in Resident Evil 1's Researcher's Will?
Oh my God, I had never considered that. I don't know, because I could never figure out what age she's meant to be.
The surnames are different. The surnames are different, so I don't know. That could be a marriage thing, because it's Alma Hartline, it's Martin Crackhorn. I just thought I'd mention it because, it's not a common name, is it?
We're getting really in the weeds here. Is the Alma in Martin Crackhorn's note? Do we know for a fact that they were married and that she took his name? It could be. Could be the case.
I didn't recall that there any mention of marriage. It could be father to daughter.
Hey, that's true as well. That is true as well. But either way, I do wonder if that was Aizawa being like, this would be a fun little connection. Let's use a name that
get everybody
really
scratching their heads.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Yeah, that's quite cool. I never thought about that.
In this bracket, we also have, is chapter 2 where we meet the quote-unquote vigilante stars, I believe it is, isn't it?
Yes, briefly, yeah.
A cute twisted nod and a nice subversion in characters that are meant to be heroes in the main games. They have, in this version's of Alma's recollection of Raccoon City, have a vigilante group that are inspired by the stars, which means that in some way they have had infamy leak out of what their exploits were in the RPD. Which again is interesting. Kind of reminds me of Batman Begins, the fake Batman.
Yes,
which is
yeah.
a very odd film reference, but basically people who are inspired to do things in the way of their quote-unquote heroes, but are completely missing the point. And they also have their own discount Albert Wesker in Arthur House.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was on top of the Umbrella Workers thing, absolutely right. Like Renegade Stars wannabe militia is also a really interesting idea and not a question that I ever personally asked about, about Stars before, regarding what the public's view of them was. Do people look up to them? Do people idolize them? Do people, what was the situation? Especially when they go missing across that summer. Like a bunch of them just disappear, and I guess the police force just stops talking about them or whatever to try and, hide them away. It's a really weird thing, but a really interesting, again, kind of novel perspective that we've never had before. So I really appreciated it.
The actual meeting with Fuchs as well. I'm sorry, I realise I'm rambling. I'm not trying to ramble.
Go for it.
The nature of the book has left me with a stream of consciousness. That felt very hostile, but I wasn't. You could tell someone was on with it, and it's later revealed to be Selfridge, who's in league with Fuchs. It doesn't make sense. Now we know the full layout of the story, because surely there are characters who should know each other who apparently one does, one doesn't. Very peculiar. Just thought I'd mention it because surely, Mr. First Aid Sprague should go, hang on a minute. I recognise you from somewhere,
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It's one of those things where it's maybe it deserves more repeat reads to hopefully pass stuff like that, but I don't know. In terms
Feel
of
free to call me wrong, by the way.
I don't know for sure. I thought the turn with Fuchs sort of being this slightly almost scary figure who did a little bit of a listen here you to all these umbrella workers who were probably already kind of panicked about what's going on was really cool later in the book. Like I didn't necessarily see that turn coming, but also maybe that might have been that I was just so overwhelmed with what I didn't know what the hell else was going on. I was just like, I'm just kind of taking everything at face value at this point because I don't know what the hell is what. Any more notes on?
Yeah, can I ask a question to
Go for it.
both
Yeah,
of you
please.
as well? So for folks outside the podcast, we were all kind of live journaling to ourselves, like to each other, like in a chat room about this as we're reading. And we all had kind of a very similar experience when we first started this. It's like, oh, this is hard to pass. This is hard to kind of put inside my brain. But we all got to a certain point where we go, wait a second. Was it the boardroom? Because it was with me. So when you get to the boardroom, was that when you started to go, wait, this is starting to get good?
Yeah, partly that. And the sort of beginning of chapter 3. I'll be honest, the sort of end of chapter 2 into 3 and then 4 was like, this is getting really good.
Yeah.
That's where I was definitely drawn in.
Yeah, that's about. Yeah, I would say it's about the same. Well, the meeting where it's getting hostile and things are heating up, but then not long after you have frustrated Emily going outside for a cigarette, and all of a sudden the alarms are blaring.
Yeah, immediately after that scene, we have outbreak time. I guess I would say the nature of a quote short story, but I don't think 5,000 words. I don't know how you determine what isn't a short story, but 5,000 words I think is longer than the first Hitchhiker's Guidebook. So, let's. Shall I get into chapter 3 through 5 then?
Yeah.
So, Alma's father lays dying in bed and she tries to distract herself from it. Alex, her friend, calls Alma out of the house late at night. He tells her he's being persecuted for being sick and is worried that he'll be abducted by the company soon. His body is hot, red and blotchy. Arthur House and the vigilante stars approach the pair of them and Alex tries to run. House asks Alex if he will come voluntarily before he risks infecting the neighbourhood, but Alex bites his hand when he grabs him. The group beat Alex to death with a metal pipe. House tells Alma that they didn't want to do it, but they wanted to help her, and she runs back inside. Back at the lab, Emily and Simon, the night watchman that she bumped into with the dog, find their way inside and come across Fuchs at the VR tank. Suspecting him, they handcuff him and hold him at gunpoint. He claims that Selfridge set him up. Studying the VR tank's monitor screen, they see horrific images of a burning city. Vigilante stars carrying a dead cow on a plank of wood through the streets. Simon's walkie-talkie connects to Robert Preich, and the limited information that comes through implies that Sprague is in the control room. In Chapter 4, the Vigilante stars call out to the residents of Raccoon City to give up their sick so that the rest may be saved. Deliver your loved ones and be selfless. The infected must be killed. A child is lifted onto the board alongside the cow head. In the lab, Emily and company encounter a colleague shuffling through a corridor. As Simon gets close to him, Emily realises what's happening, but it's too late. Simon is attacked. His dog Toby is mauled, but he manages to take the zombie out with a headshot. The group head to the medical bay. Speakers around the institute are playing sounds that match the events they'd previously seen on the screen. The end of Raccoon City. Hiromu Kinuata, I'm going to get this wrong every time, I apologise. Kinuta finds them, followed quickly by Ulysses Alam. Alam demands their flashlight. He asks Simon if he was bitten and, not hesitating, blasts his head off when he says yes. Kinuta, Fuchs and Emily hide around the room in the dark. Robert Preich, who they heard from earlier, arrives on the scene only to be immediately killed. Emily carefully sneaks towards Simon's corpse, grabs his gun and the handcuff key. She and Fuchs both attempt to fire at Alam but fail to hit him. However, he's taken down by a strange black-red blob. In Chapter 5, we follow Alma as she runs into the streets. She threatens Arthur House with her grandfather's peacemaker, but he doesn't resist, knowing that he's infected. A riot begins between those gathered around the cowhead, many in different stages of infection. The infected overcome everyone, ripping them to pieces. The city is on fire in, quote, a mutant wave. A helicopter approaches the scene, cutting down the infected with a machine gun. Alma, now joined by her lover Frank, escape to a basketball court. Frank is infected, as is Alma. They are approached again by the faceless woman who demands to know who Alma is and if she's behind everything. Alma, not knowing how to answer, or perhaps knowing better than ever, feels the embroidered rose on her jacket and describes herself as a rose, open to everything, absorbing everything, making everything its own. The woman asks where Sprague is. Alma mentions wanting to grab her embarrassing diary before leaving and tells a dying Frank that she's pregnant. Meanwhile, Alam has fled the medical centre after losing an arm. The power has returned to the Institute, meaning that the group can use the telecom to contact their colleagues. They contact Sprague, but the telecom shows Rena. Sprague explains that the system going down has played havoc with the ID system. Sprague then goes on to tell everyone that the tank is stored memory. Alma's peaceful dreams became nightmares brought on by regaining her memories of Raccoon City. It's implied that Rose, now fully sentient, has caused everything. Stem cells, carrier fluid, the T-virus. Rose is now a unique organism. Sprague has further reveals he was in Raccoon City and Ulysses Alam was seen dumping the cow into the water tank. Rose was not only in the water but has also seized Carmen, the AI. Kinuta directs the group back to the VR room as it has no ventilation system for Rose, who is a giant liquid, to move through. Countdown signals throughout the institute signifying the release of Rose. In the VR room, Emily, Fuchs and Kinuta come across Selfridge, who shoots Fuchs in the leg and locks the room down with everyone inside of it. Rose is unleashed upon the lab. Red, brown, thick, viscous goo filled with bobbing body parts floods the building. Quote, a brew of horror surrounds them. That is the bulk of the book. I realise that is a lot of stuff to talk about, but I didn't want to go chapter by chapter because we really would have been here forever. But this is this is Act 2. How did we feel about it all kicking off through chapters 3 to 5? Steve, let's start with you.
Evil stars suck, don't they? Like, really?
They're awful.
It felt almost like a different era, though. Like, lynch mobs and this whole carrying a cow's head business feels almost like, I don't want to say Victorian, but like almost pagan ritually or something. Mm-hmm. Like, bring out your dead. It's twisted. I can't really see that happening in American Midwest city streets, but that's a me thing. Maybe I think better of people.
Yeah.
The execution of Simon for just going, yeah, I've been bit, is a is rapid. That's where there's a cut off for me. Like, oh crap! Like that's the put phone down. Just got real.
Yeah.
But I was not expecting the whole, like, because Alam already seems deranged at that point before he actually fires the shot, and from that point on, he's basically he's silhouetted in the dark. Everyone else is trying to hide from him, and he comes across as a crazy man. Now, when you say reddish blob, I was under the impression that his dog, who was also mauled in the attack by the zombie, was also like quote unquote becoming a zombie dog, and its last bit was to try and avenge his master, so to speak. But that's by the by. Okay, the main takeaway is Rose is Parasite Eve. Like,
yes,
it feels. It feels this feels like sentient mitochondria taking its will back on the people, but in this case, it's more the will of Alma Heartline, or maybe the unborn child twisted into some kind of monstrosity. This is like peak nightmare body horror, but I'm still trying to kind of confuse. So there really was something in the water, and no one bothered to check. And First Aid Sprague is just like, yeah, let's see what happens.
Basically,
Selfridge, bless him. This is the character who barely gets any mention. He will get an even worse fate in the coming chapters. I picture the middleman from, what is it? Is it the second Jurassic Park film who gets murdered in the bog? That's the visual I get from Selfridge. That's just the cowardly middleman who's all about the money, and his only action in the novel is to literally shoot second lead character in the leg. Great.
For no reason as well, by the way. Like, I don't understand why he shot him at all.
Yeah.
You're in my space. This is my space. I don't know. I didn't get it.
Very paranoid fear, I think.
Maybe,
but no, I'm trying to figure out. I'm still trying to parse, and this is on like having second reading. We're now discussing it on the podcast. Just what the heck happened to Ulysses Alam?
Oh boy, I don't know if I can even start with that. I think the implication there is that Rose my understanding is that Rose becoming sentient got into Rena and got into Alam through their connection. Then Alam went and dumped the cow in with a sample of Rose in it to spread it further. That was my understanding. So, because Rena's in the VR tank a bunch, she's probably the sort of patient zero, if you like, of being infected by sort of, Alma's will, if you like. And then it spreads to Alam. And
so that means Rose is an STD, sort of, right? In this particular case, because they're implied to be mothers, yeah?
Yeah. Well, yeah, actually, in fact, the book actually describes them as like the trio of them of having like a terrible threesome. So, I mean, maybe they had sex in the VR tank. I don't know. Yeah, it's possible. It's a strange one. Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff to get into. You're absolutely right. Like the shock. And actually, in a weird way, it was kind of refreshing. Although maybe not. It does very like, you know, the scene in Remake 3 with Nikolai where he just kills Murphy immediately. It's kind of like that, right? Whereas like, oh, he's infected. Oh, they're going to and ah about it. No, he just gets shot by this guy. Although it turns out that Alam is not doing it to protect everyone else. I don't know why he does it, to be honest, if he's infected. Does he really care that someone else has been bitten? It's strange. But I guess later in the book, they do say he's kind of moving from human to zombie back and forth. So maybe he can't figure out what he's doing. Maybe he's fighting for control. It's a really strange thing. And there are so many questions there. Like, I think I'm with you. I think the red blob thing probably is a dog because it never comes up again. My first thought was like, and a red blob descended from the ceiling. I was like, we've got lickers. Okay. But I guess not because it's never mentioned. Strange. It's very strange. It's really nice to see the umbrella workers being able to follow them properly as well, because it really rams home that most people working at Umbrella wouldn't even know what they were contributing to in many cases. I mean, it's a giant corporation, so it's evil, right? In a corporate and sort of capitalism sense anyway. But the really dark stuff, a lot of people might not necessarily know what it is their sort of superiors are using their work for. Not to forgive these people or anything like that, but it is really interesting in this case where these scientists are working on a vaccine as far as they know, and as far as they know that's the truth, and it is kind of the truth. It's just Sprague, sort of spoilers for the last part, is attempting to use a vaccine to kill everyone, which is bizarre, but they don't know how close to the fire they are until it burns them, really. So having this hang above characters for even just a moment, the what have I done, is really, really cool. I think the Renegade Stars Militia stuff is also really interesting. And again, not a question we ever asked about what happened in terms of, your neighbours are monsters. There was sort of all the disappearances in the months leading towards September in Raccoon City. And then the occasional person who would have seen a zombie or had an experience with it. I don't know if it would fit, like how quickly the infection seems to spread through Raccoon City, if it would actually fit. But it's a really interesting concept to explore that we've never been able to do, which is miraculous considering the amount of times we've gone back to Raccoon City to add more characters into that and flesh out even more. The idea of there being a group of people going around being like, bring out your dead, or bring out your nearly dead and we'll finish them off to try and save everyone. And then in the long run, it just kind of goes horribly wrong for them. And they're doing it at the last possible moment. It's implied that the nuke is basically about to drop. So to that extent, I don't believe it because I don't think there's that many humans alive at this point. We're led to believe that this is going on while Nemesis is chasing Jill around. But as a conceptual thing, it is really, really interesting. Also, what's interesting, I thought, in this book was that we're in an outbreak because the power goes down and because the characters assume we are. We didn't see any BOWs, but sort of you're in the outbreak now begins before the first zombie, which I think is quite unique, which is because books can do some really wild things. Literally, the limit of a book is the imagination of the writer and the person reading it, so they could do whatever they want. So it was really interesting to see them do less than some other media would. And a less is more is kind of a vibe here. And maybe less is more explanation is also a vibe here as well. But it makes you wait for that zombie. You know it's coming. The power's down. Everyone says, oh, it's probably an outbreak. And then it's like, here he comes. The zombie walking on the stumps of legs. And when it does kick off, the writer does a hell of a job describing that sequence of events. And just like S.D. Perry is a dab hand at gore, perhaps even more so. The gore in this book is incredibly extreme. There is a section where I think Emily is trying to get its attention or just trying to pull it away, and she's like pulling at its cheek, and she opens her hand afterwards and she's got like flesh in her hand. It's like, that's disgusting, and I love it. And yeah, like you said, Steve, my only other note on this sort of section really is that the translation and the writing didn't really help manage sort of locations in my head. Like I couldn't figure out sort of the size and the space and layout of the medical room. I know what it looks like in my head. I don't know where that sort of shape and form came from, but I couldn't really map out the sort of how much space they had and stuff very well for me. That being said, that was probably... It's fighting neck and neck with the meeting scene at the beginning for the best sequence in the book for me. The tension really made me think of The Thing when Alam comes in and no one knows what to think of him. Is he even infected? What's he's infected? Like, the vibe completely changes when he comes in, even though he's a bit of a weirdo maybe, but like their colleague who they are already a little bit unsure about. But in this high stress situation, yeah, it ramps up very quickly. So yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed that part, chapter 4, that whole showdown in the medical bay. James, what did you think of the middle part of Rose Blank?
So the story here really starts to escalate. Like, it just kind of steps up. Not to like 11, that happens in the last two, but the descriptive writing, which was really strangely absent in previous chapters for the most part, it dialed in really hard. as you've mentioned, like I want to talk about like the way Ozawa like captures the dying breath of an entire city in these chapters. Like it's something I've wanted to see in Resident Evil media, like the tragedy of it. You see glimpses in the game. Some go harder than others, but I feel like Izawa captures it perfectly. The actual horror of it, like there's a quote that made me literally shiver when I read it, and it was the virus has spread seamlessly and without warning. Its outburst sweeps through the city like a hurricane. Parents eat their crying children. Children devour their wide-eyed parents with their bare fingers. Siblings have their teeth buried in each other.
Horrific.
Like, it reminded me of Homeworld's introduction.
What, characters burning?
One of your officers, one of your officers has to describe the burning of Karak, your home. And it came out around the same time. He's describing it as it happens. And Izawa, every time he explained it, like it brought me back then. He captures it perfectly and throughout the story. And that, like, I was really like, I wasn't feeling 100% about the kind of the dreamscape stuff at first. But once I got into these chapters, I really started to understand and really dialed in on it. And like you, Si, and like you, Steve, like I like my favorite scene in these entire chapters is Alum. Like when he turns on the staff in the medical offices, like it felt, I don't know if this makes sense, but it felt like a top end espionage moment. Like the action of it and the brutality of it. There is no hesitation from Alum. One of my least favorite tropes in media is when someone who is clearly there for murder doesn't do the murdering. But Alum stepped up and did some gosh darn murdering. Like
Point blank range.
Oh man, it was brutal. Like, yeah, I loved it. And it's after this moment, and after that is when like the story just catapults itself. Like everything starts to this is when everything starts to turn up to 11. You learn about Rose being sentient and using people for its own means to destroy T-Virus, but also tackling with its own mortality, while having the trauma of residents' memories inside it. Like, that is my favorite story hook, but that is something I'll talk about in the later chapters, the next one. Also, just to end it, or to end my section, I'm wondering if Blank Rose is inspiration used for RE7 and 8.
The stored memory thing.
The stored memories, becoming a center of those memories, having a place where, because I'm talking about the ending here, like I did at the beginning of this podcast, but that structure that was created at the end could have been like a proto Megamycete, potentially. I'm wondering if they drew inspiration from that, and that'd be really cool if they did. Again, the DLC is called Shadows of Rose, so I'm wondering if.
Oh, now we're going into the weeds.
Well, I mean, she was created by it, right? So, it's not too far fetched in this pseudoscience bonanza. But yeah, that's all I got to say about chapter 3 to 5.
The parallels are very funny, if nothing else. Just either if it's a funny coincidence or genuinely, they looked at this and went, "Hey, what if we made this?" Took these elements of it and kind of did it our own way. I don't know, but yeah. You're absolutely right in terms of how harrowing the Raccoon City stuff is. Like, whether it fits or not or whatever, but just the idea of all these sort of terrified residents coming out to a group of vigilante dudes into essentially like this lawless town now, being like, hey, give up people so that we can kill them so that you can be saved. And people actually doing it. And there's a child, placed on there. And then the next thing you see from it is Arthur House, this guy that is just sort of the experience that you have with him as the reader from the perspective of Alma and, the people that she loves is kind of a piece of work. And you still don't know for sure, because the last thing you see of him, he's got his head in his hands and he's like, yeah, whatever, kill me because I'm infected. Is he selfish and he's like kind of burnt out because, oh, this is it, I'm done, like I'm infected, it's over for me? Or has he kind of been doing just what he thinks is right, but he thinks he's saving people by taking out the infected. There's a lot of stuff to think about there. It's really cool that we get to see something that actually genuinely touches on the different kind of perspectives of it without just going, yeah, but this one's the evil one because then he stood up and went wah, 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 at the end. Like, yeah, he might have been a piece of work, but his idea of like, this is our last gasp attempt, and maybe he knew that it was all over anyway. Like the hopelessness of it all. I don't know. It's super interesting, and I kind of wish we had more of it. But there you go. Ironically, 30 years after the Raccoon City incident, we're all going, stop going back to it. I'm now like, you know what though? Go back to it a little bit more.
Just give us a little bit. Just tell us what, you know.
Ground level, less superheroes, more people.
Yeah, totally. That's the kind of stuff I want.
Let's go, says Frank, determined. We run to the streets and pinch our eyes so we don't have to see the mounds of corpses. I hold on to his arm and let him just navigate. The city is burning. Everything is bright red, lit by the flames. We are lost in the streets that we know like the backs of our hand and wander around, from dead end to dead end. Finally, we stop. Where are we? Around us, the city dwellers attack each other and greedily shred each other. The virus has spread seamlessly and without any warning, and its sudden outburst sweeps through the city like a hurricane. Parents eat their crying children. Children devour their wide-eyed parents with their bare fingers. Siblings have their teeth buried in each other. People who until yesterday were friendly on the street now collide mercilessly and kill each other. Some intersections are blocked. The infrastructure of the city is completely paralyzed. Finally, we come to a deserted basketball court. We decide to take a break here, and I sit down under the basket. Frank leans against the pole with a sigh and stands there, legs apart. Where do we go now? He questions himself. When I look into his face, I cannot suppress a scream of terror. The signs of the disease, the red spots, have spread from his forehead to his chin. Did I scare you? How can this be? I take hold of my cheek. Suddenly, everything feels different. My skin feels spongy from below the eyes to my chin. When I look at my arm, I recognize the red cracks that spread over the skin. My flesh has started to crack. Do not worry, it doesn't hurt at all. He speaks gently, like a dentist. So gentle that his voice almost makes me cry. Out of sheer fear, I lose all sense of reality. I lie down on the court, arms and legs stretched far from me, where thoughts go through my head. The moans of the burning city are streaming toward me amid joyful howls. So many people, so many beings. Like the soldiers in the photo, they stop and freeze. A picture forever. Grandfather laughs, father laughs, Alex laughs, Arthur House, Mr. Kirkwood, you and me. Finally, I have you. The faceless woman is suddenly next to me. Are you behind this whole thing? She asks me with a reproachful look. Strange. I'm supposed to be behind the whole thing? I thought she was. I didn't do anything except live my normal life. Who are you? I told you, I'm Alma Heartline. How many more times will you ask? Who am I? When is a human being a human? Am I a human or not? Your name does not interest me. I want to know who you are. What are you? I touch the embroidery in my velvet coat with my fingertips. The rose stands out a little from the rest of the fabric and is therefore easy to notice. A rose, open to everything. Absorbing everything, making everything its own.
Okay, cool. Let me sort of sum up chapters 6 and 7 as best I can, and I'll warn at this point, this is probably going to be the area where we might maybe disagree with each other, and maybe we disagree with the reader, but what I've got here in the summary is my interpretation of things, because this is when we get, and James said it earlier, esoteric. This is where we get really esoteric. So, in Raccoon City, Sprague and his partner, Ambrose, explore the debris. The things they see are horrific and scarring, but Sprague is intent on finding a survivor. They find Alma and Frank in the basketball court, and excited Sprague describes Alma as infected, but her personality still exists. He takes responsibility as they take her back to their squad for evac. In the VR room, Fuchs admits that he's been playing Selfridge to gain access to the room. In truth, his visit to the Institute was at the hands of the US government looking to steal vaccines and gain intel on Umbrella's intentions, especially with expected moves to Europe looking to be harmful to the strained relationship between Umbrella and the government. And when I say government, that's not explicit here. That was my assumption. I think some people online say he's an environmental activist. He could be just someone that has supported Umbrella in some way or opposed them. That's something that we should talk about. Regardless, the pipes around the room begin to burst as the group try to make sense of what's happening. Rose seemingly gained control of Ulysses and Rena. A lamb, under the influence of Rose, dumped the cow into the water tank. Rose also took control of Carmen during the power outage, allowing it to spread the contamination further. In an attempt to reach out to Rose, Emily elects to get into the VR tank. Here, Canuta theorizes that the muddy broth is Rose's body and that Carmen is now Rose's mind. Finally, the vaccine, the interpretation is to cleanse the body completely, even of its humanity, is Rose's purpose. Whilst inside the simulation, Emily is led to believe that they have control of Carmen again and insists that they purge Rose from the system. Canuta opens the network and the local connection at the same time, inadvertently letting Rose in even further. The door to the VR room swings open and Rena walks inside, her body morphing uncontrollably. Inside of the VR simulation, Emily discovers that Alma shares a face with Rena and Frank shares a face with a lamb. She also sees someone with the face of Robert Price, who they just watched die. Rose is using the faces of everyone at the Institute. We also discover that the faceless woman is actually Emily, adding more information into the system and influencing previous memories or perhaps dreams of Alma, as she demands to know where Sprague is. Suddenly, Emily's oxygen supply is interrupted. She resets the Carmen AI, giving her an hour of downtime before she reboots, and Fuchs pulls Emily out of the VR simulation. Canuta has been absorbed by Rose by this point, and Rose has destroyed the room and left. Emily tells Fuchs that she theorises that Sprague had planned this from the beginning and that the VR simulation was simply a way to unite Rose with artificial intelligence in hopes of proving his theory that a vaccine may not have a universal effect on everyone and that immunity is, quote, from the start a closed system tailored to the individual. The idea that vaccines, even if they can cure one person, could harm healthy cells in another. And in fact, that it was possible to develop a so-called vaccine to do this on purpose, to destroy the immune system and flood a body with a virus to change the body into something new. In Chapter 7, Fuchs, Emily and Selfridge arrive at the control room and confront Sprague, who is sat with the Rose-inflicted alarm and Canuta. Sprague reveals that Rena repeating a simulation in the machine is what let Rose into her mind in the first place and brought her to the front. And Sprague also decides to unleash Rose following this event. As the body of Canuta disgustingly explodes from the inside out, Sprague monologues about Rose's need to feed on electricity and that the events in the simulation were based on Alma's diary, herself being a strange case of dying mid-transformation into a zombie. Emily assumes that this was Sprague's decision to drop the cow into the water, infected with, and this is her assumption, a T-virus, Rose, and a battery for her to feed on so that she could grow within the system. After Sprague lets it slip that Fuchs was Ambrose, his partner at Raccoon City, he lets them all live, and knowing that his individual identity is now lost in the mass of Rose, elects to kill himself with an electrical plug. Selfridge, who has already left the room, is killed by Rose by total impalement. Let's put it that way. As Emily and Fuchs escape, chased by a lamb, Carmen comes back online one last time, as programmed by Emily earlier. She turns the power in the Institute up to maximum, blowing it completely for one final time, and the pair drive out into the night as Emily fights off Rose for control of her own consciousness. In the epilogue, they watch Rose completely take over the building. However, with no more power left to feed on, it will surely die. Fuchs asks for another pseudonym, and Emily suggests Tom after Tom Sawyer, the character who rewrote another person's story. That's a lot of words, and some of it probably made very little sense to you listening, but we're going to try and pull it apart. James, what did you think of the final act of Rose Blank. Were you as confused as I was?
First of all, congratulations to Sai for getting
Thank
through.
you. Thank you.
Getting through all that.
Jesus
clap,
Christ.
clap. If I was to give these 2 chapters a subheading, it'd be struggle.
That's how I felt.
Both in terms of me understanding them, but also the struggle of Emily and Richard Fuchs. Like, I felt like these guys should have died at least 5 times in these chapters alone. And at this point, I'm not sure how they survived like, at all. Yeah, things kind of start to fall apart for me narratively a bit with the endings. I'm not sure why Kanuta was in First Aid Sprague's room, other than shock value. Like, the guy literally just dissolved for no reason. I might have an explanation, though. I was struggling with why Rose decided to do that. However, the footprint of Resident Evil was brought back with the alum chase scene, as well as the Prash death. Aizawa is so good at body horror description. Like, he's so good. Like, the way I read Prash's death was he got impaled, but then he kind of went inside of himself. Like,
interesting.
And he just, I don't know why I imagined that, but like, it felt like he just kind of, he did get impaled, but then he just went inside. Selfridge, sorry, yeah, not Prash.
Yeah, right, totally.
Yeah. That's kind of how I imagined it. And at this point, I couldn't put the story down, just because I wanted to see the next wild horror description. But yeah, I'm not sure if it was deliberate either. But this might actually explain some of the chaos and the wildness. And might actually bring a lot of our kind of worries. Potentially, it's kind of leveled me out in terms of the story. But there is something in the real world, in our world, known as a cytokine storm. It's essentially a reaction the body can get when too many immune system triggers happen at once. So the body gets overwhelmed, causing inflammation, fevers, fatigue. And my theory is, like, with Rose, it's a whole city's worth of immune systems triggering at once. And with how T works, by fusing itself with the cells in the body, that only made the reaction that we got worse and completely chaotic. And it led to that complete chaos. Like, so, which is why nothing kind of makes sense, you know, before the epilogue of the story, anyway. And this is speculation by me, by the way. It's just that that's how it made sense to me, because we're talking about vaccines here. And it made how hard the ending was to follow a bit easier to digest for me, because you're teleporting POVs so fast from Rose to Alma, who is Rose, to Prash, to Selfridge, Selfridge. As you can see, very confusing. Emily, and then Richard, and it's happening with increased tempo, and also random faces are being thrown in for extra chaos. I did love the concept. It's a bit loose in terms of science, but we're dealing with Resident Evil here, and pseudoscience, you know, is its wheelhouse. So, you know, best not to think too hard about it. Maybe. I mean, unless they want you to, and in which case it all kind of falls apart. But that's how I kind of, it brought me to enjoying, it brought me to a point of enjoying it, as I just imagined this complete chaos. It explains Alum being really wild. It explains Kanuta just, you know, being used as basically a prop by Sprague. It kind of explains Sprague being a bit, I'm going to get into that in characters, but explains him a bit as well. So like, it feels, in that respect, other than Parasite Eve, like Steve said earlier on, it does feel Resident Evil in that way, because they're using real world kind of conditions, if that was intended. They're using real world conditions to actually explain things.
Oh,
I'm interested to see what you guys think about that.
I have lots of mixed feelings about the sort of end of the book. Like, there are two sort of parts of it where there's the science part of it, which I have lots of questions and lots of assumptions, but then there's also the sort of fantastical element the further we get as we explore sort of Emily understanding Rose's consciousness and all this stuff and the way that it ends. And at that point, this is what I describe as, here we enter Tetsuya Nomura land, which I realise might be quite an insensitive metaphor. Tetsuya Nomura being the writer of many recent Final Fantasy and Square games, in particular Kingdom Hearts as well. I appreciate that different cultures have lots of different kinds of storytelling. I think that's awesome. But I think I've probably said before that sometimes I can really struggle with certain types of Japanese storytelling. And this is sort of Japanese fantasy writing at its worst for me at times. And you see this in Nomura's work all the time. That's why I use him as a sort of starting point. Lots of words that are sort of floaty and sort of pseudo-meaningful, but they're just floating around and pseudo-meaning nothing at all. Like, there's no outcropping here to put your hands and feet onto and hold onto for dear life. And I don't mean that in a this is a wild ride kind of way, just in a like, I feel I'm getting battered around and being asked, do I give up yet? And I'm sure this is great to some people, and I appreciate the value of not telling your audience everything, or in fact getting really like existential with things. But there are lots of stuff in the last two chapters which are a complete mystery to me when we sort of explore the consciousness side of things, and you know, Emily floating off into the sky, seeing Raccoon City from above, and coming to these grand realizations about what it means to be I and identity. And I mean, at one point, does she realize she's Carmen? She thinks she's the AI, and she realizes that was the name that her grandparents gave her. So what's going on there? I understand any of that part, and I am going to struggle to understand it on repeat read-throughs. It just doesn't, that kind of storytelling doesn't click with me. But the Carmen stuff is also another struggle for me that I don't really understand what its purpose was in terms of why would Rose infect an AI and how that would work. Of course, like how that happened, why it happened. I guess it's just simple as it would spread her infection quicker. I guess that's all it is. Like, it has the ability to open more areas of the facility and get around a lot quicker, perhaps. Get out of the tank. I don't really know. Like, it's a weird one. There was some stuff here that, even though I didn't know what was going on for a lot of it, there were some bits that I was like, oh, okay. Like, I didn't see the Rose reveal coming, that she's not like VR suspension juice and sort of is just in fact goop made of people with Alma's consciousness and Alma's diary being like a script in there, which was really interesting, like this soup of DNA. And again, there's so many questions there about what does it want? Does it want freedom? Does it want to cleanse people? How does it work? Is it designed to do something because of this sort of Sprague and it lines up with his goal, or is that just a coincidence? Is it looking to cure and it just doesn't know any better? It just accidentally breaks down everything else? Lots of questions there, which I don't know, maybe if you're not meant to have an answer, like that is part of the cosmic horror aspect, if nothing else. And the other big moment for me was I did not see the faceless woman reveal coming, that it's actually Emily sort of later on that day, just sort of swimming through those memories. I thought that was really cool. I do wonder if it was a little bit meaningless at the end. Like, it didn't really do much for me in terms of furthering the story. I think it played into that whole conversation about what is consciousness and shared experience. So if you got something out of that portion of the book, maybe it really landed for you. But these last two chapters are unfortunately kind of a mess. I'm very glad that the ending landed, like the absolute ending, the idea of, well, hang on, if we just fill it through all the power it can get, this lab is like cut off from the rest of the world. So when it's done with that, there's nowhere else it can go. I was like, oh yeah, it is as simple as that. Fair enough. You don't need to drop a bomb on everything or blow up everything or whatever. You just need to get out and this thing will starve. And I thought that was really interesting. And the idea of them just sort of watching it from afar was quite a sweet little epilogue. And my last question is, what the hell was up with Selfridge's death?
Yeah,
he orgasmed to death. I mean, fair enough. Steve, what do you think of the ending of this book?
Well, for one thing, I think Selfridge discovered they liked at the worst possible time. You say Nomura-esque, and personally, there's a part of me, this is especially on rereading it this morning, that I felt like I could almost feel the Kojima cutaways to archive footage as Sprague's explaining things from MGS1. You know, that's the kind of vibe I got. I'm much in the camp that how is it because like the Rose's need for electricity is also in the way we can hand wave it and that it can override an AI. But also, why do we have an AI that's just dispensing coffee in this place? That's by the by. I genuinely like the fact that we have basically got two people who go into the Raccoon City incident and come away with completely different goals and mindsets afterwards. We've got Sprague, who is basically, I'm going to make a vaccine that's not really a vaccine, that's made out of person soup, that's going to be in its own way malicious and override people. And then we've got Ambrose, who's like, I'm going to reinvent my personality. And I personally think he's just got a vendetta against Umbrella from what he's seen. I don't see the government connection. I see a man who's just decided, right, they did these horrible things in Raccoon City and I am going to stop them. But that's just my takeaway. He's gone from being a USS or something else to activist who is out for Umbrella personally. Who's masquerading as a spook otherwise.
Okay. I misread that completely with him.
Yeah, what was your interpretation of Fuchs? I'm curious.
So with Fuchs, I thought Sprague was making up. Like I thought he was making he called him Ambrose, but I don't think because he says at the end it's like, oh, I've had many names. I've had Ambrose, you know, it's like, you know, but I don't think Fuchs was being serious. I think because he was like the later half of this book, he'd been joking around with Emily, kind of flirty in a way, right? And Sprague, when he said that, like we were because why would Fuchs be there? You know, there was no connection, so I'm wondering if he just saw Ambrose in Fuchs. Maybe.
I don't know.
Are we saying that Sprague's cheese just finally slid off his cracker and he was seeing people as other people?
Yeah, like absolutely bonkers sauce. Like that guy was.
He had a rocket pen, James.
If he'd drunk the old rose juice, then I would 100% back that theory. Like, because then Rose is just putting faces on people. So maybe Sprague, now also infected with Rose, saw it that way. Like, that would be really cool. But like, you might be right anyway. I don't know. Just to add to that, maybe that could be an element of it. But I think with the timing, that wouldn't necessarily match up. But interesting. Yeah, totally. I find it funny that we all had like completely different explanations of what was meant to be like, here's some exposition, and we all just interpreted it differently.
The main takeaway is, I feel like the actual final payoff being that it's self-destructive. It will, like, they literally just close it in and go, right, okay, let it eat all the electricity that's got left, and then it's done. It's such a sad payoff, really, for the actual quote-unquote bioweapon that Rose becomes. This meat slurry that can both control an AI, manipulate people, and turn people into basically pseudo-tyrants in a lamb's case as a stalker weapon. It's a shame. It's like, oh yeah, let's just let it pop the fuses then. Later. It's a bit of a strange closure. I mean, we even have like a little bit of a introspective, because Emily is infected. She's been drinking the dodgy coffee, the rose tinted cow tea, the OXO beef juice, and she has to fight off Rose inside herself outside of the building at the end, which is not quite the quote unquote final showdown. It's not like the end of FF7 where Cloud's beating Sephiroth with Omni Slash. It's just bit of a whimper, which is
a weird one.
It's an odd one, this, and we'll get into, I suppose, the more complex thoughts about it. But as an actual ending goes, my main takeaway is the only person who has any kind of arc is Emily, which is a shame.
Oh, we're going to have such differing opinions.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about the writing quality now that we talked about the story. How do we feel like the book was written? I know we've highlighted certain things we liked about it and maybe certain things we didn't. And not necessarily, obviously, the translation, but I still think you can pass the style of the writing and certain turns of phrase from that regardless. And you know, how we feel about that. There's some really good turns of phrase or little sort of moments in this that I really, really liked. I did think the book was sometimes quite pretentiously written, and especially like this was before I got to the end, which is how I feel about a lot of that kind of wishy-washy fantasy writing. But yeah, it meanders sometimes through its own sort of pretentiousness. But some of the metaphors that it does make are quite pretty. There was a bit early on, Emily thinking to herself about her family, describing the similarities between herself and her daughter, and how to Emily's parents, quote, "It must have been as if their own daughter had once again slipped into her children's shoes and returned home," was a really nice sentiment in terms of how much they look alike and stuff like that. I thought that was really sweet. But also on the absolute other end of that, a really powerful thing I thought, which really rung true for me in 2025, is the scene where Alma describes talking to her grandfather about the famous war photo of the flag, the American soldiers putting the flag back up, or are they stopping it from falling down? Yep. And he says it's not the historical facts that matter, but the circumstances of how a story is delivered and what it does in people's minds. I thought it was a really good, powerful statement for one of the themes of the book, but also just it's such a put the book down for a moment and just think, yeah, no kidding, this is like MGS2, funnily enough, level sort of predicting stuff here, that is painfully true today. It doesn't really matter about what led up to that photo, just the way that photo is then sort of denigrated by other people and told, spoken about. Yeah, I thought that was particularly powerful. And again, we talked about the gore. The gore was incredible. The gore was disgusting. There were like 3 or 4 deaths in this that I was like, Jesus, that is savage. Steve, how did you feel about the writing quality?
Generally speaking, the VR sequences or the Alma sequences took me a few goes to finally figure out what was going on. And then I was just like, oh, it's like those bits in Signalis, isn't it? And it's, yeah. Having to go through that coda, it was really fun. It's more the ideas and concepts like of the little things. Like I don't get why cows are getting it hard in this book, but they are.
They deserve it.
It's the philosophy behind vaccines and the lynch mob aspect of how the quote unquote vigilante stars operate that really get at me. And then the life of a young girl going through all these like normal things, meeting a teacher, meeting a boyfriend, having sex in a graveyard, bit of a dodgy one there, missus. And then like seeing a friend get murdered, and this is turned by some scientist into a vaccine bioweapon. It's twisted. Meanwhile, we've got Emily, who's like constantly thinking about her daughter, but doesn't want to admit that she cares about her daughter, and then comes to almost close to the epiphany at the end, which is nice. That's really a bittersweet thing that she thinks she's not thinking about her, but she has been thinking about her, which I like too. That being said, though, there are a lot of things that just bamboozle me, and it takes several goes, and that may be just the nature of fan fiction in itself. But I'll save that for the summary. But generally, I was left confused, had to go at it multiple times, and enjoyed it.
James, what are your thoughts on the quality of the writing in the book?
So there were some really extremely well-written points in the story. You've brought up them, so I think we've spoken about all like the big points. But specifically with the body horror, and the POV, but the POV switches, it was very hard to follow.
Yeah.
At times because of like the weirdness of the story itself. I think proof is just us three. I mean, we were so confused. Like anyone's first read through of this novel will be confusing until a second read. I believe. Like you're gonna understand some things, but I don't think you're gonna understand everything until your second or third read. There's stuff that just won't make sense. The structure of it is also something I'm just not used to either. Yeah. A novel-sized story with 7 chapters is very hard to pass.
True.
In my head, when I'm used to 30 plus chapters in a book this large. Overall, though, the highs were really high, and they did carry the majority of the book for me.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, that sort of brings us on to talking about themes, moods, atmosphere, vibes, how we felt about sort of that kind of thing. And I do think that this book, for all of its struggles to tell its own story sometimes, or at least the struggle of us to understand it, The vibes are pretty strong. Even early on, sort of in that first chapter, we have the skinned cow, the threat of poison in the water supply, while scientists are working in this weird hidden lab in the middle of nowhere on a vaccine, and the upcoming inspection by this mysterious man. It all ties together nicely for this awful feeling of paranoia, sort of fear of sickness, and that kind of mood. It was all kind of, it had this really strange sort of theming to it that was felt of a different era. And I don't want to get sort of strange about this, but there was a lot of media around the 80s and early 90s, for example, and this will happen every few decades, where media will be based on fear of the whatever the most recent crisis was. And in that kind of period, there was a lot of media about fear of AIDS, for example. And I got that same kind of vibe here, where it's like fear of sickness. And there's talk about the way the VR stuff is really described and is disorientating kind of builds into that too. That sort of nauseous kind of feeling that something is about to go horribly wrong. And that Emily is pretty much at the center of it all. It's almost kind of like a Kubrick movie in my head. It's like this one random person and everything is building and it's going to break them or whatever. Or even it could have been a play at some points before it got really, really mad. And I think it tried to maintain that sort of character-driven narrative that you would get out of a play or a Kubrick movie. But I think that it struggles to do so because it gets into the weird and ethereal, and those things are just really hard to balance. The characters should keep everything grounded, and they do to a certain point. But then later into the book, they're all melting into each other. So it's kind of hard to keep things grounded when you're all goop. I thought that it was an interesting approach to the T-virus, to talk about it. Sort of Sprague's intention to break down the immune system and rebuild DNA into a new species, which kind of links the virus to its original purpose, not mutating creatures, but looking for the next stage of human evolution and how that can affect, immunocompromised people was quite an interesting part to think on as I sort of went through it. And there's a whole thing at the end, though. That was all largely positive, but I have a whole thing at the end that I didn't quite get, where there's imagery described to us, and some of it is literally the Ouroboros, and I don't mean that kind. I mean the original meaning of the word, where all things are cyclical. We have the snake eating its own tail, but I don't know how that relates to this story and how it relates to Rose particularly. I just felt like it was maybe unless I've missed something, it felt like it was just inserted in there for the sake of imagery, which is odd because I thought again that the book had a really intense and deliberate kind of vibe early on, and then unfortunately it kind of went a bit scattershot the further in it got. Steve, any thoughts on atmosphere and mood?
There are times where I can actually hear, I've heard the Resident Evil 1.5 OST a few times, and there are various tracks that kind of bleed into it, but then there's the initial parts where you're hearing about Emily's day in the lab. It feels almost like I can hear Concrete Bound playing. I know that sounds strange, right? But hearing music from Resident Evil games to kind of evoke the mood, unintentionally in my mind, says a lot, because not a lot of fiction does that for me. The general feel and genre of this fiction being more almost psychological, or at least attempted to be with the VR sequences, I feel like misses the mark a lot, because it's hard for me to really get into what the vibe was going. And I still now on 2.5 reads cannot for the life of me figure out what Rose wanted to do besides just murder people in various ways. And I don't know how Sprague was quote unquote controlling it, but they were.
Yeah, apparently, yeah.
And that feels hollow. If it's meant to be implied that it's the quote unquote the womb, the afterbirth of Alma's unfortunately never got a chance to be born baby, and then it's been taken over by her will in some kind of vengeance-ridden way. But then you find out that Sprague's the one who's been making the actual system, so it's his interpretation of her diary, which, God bless her, in true Resident Evil tradition, her diary must have been specific about some things. But then you compare it to the likes of traditional Resident Evil fan fiction, and that tends to fall into one of two camps. It's either wish fulfillment or it's vague fan service stuff. Like, Chris and Jill walked off to the sunset and had many, many kids. Or Claire and Steve both survived Code Veronica. Or Wesker's come back for a final showdown yet again. It's this is a lot more. It challenges a bit further than that. It tries to push the world a bit more. And for that, I'll give it some credit. Vibe-wise, a more psychological approach, even if it's a bit ham-fisted and a bit odd, I'll take over just here's Umbrella doing some nasties, and then eventually the big bad goes, and the world will burn in an inferno of hate. I mean, Sprague doesn't want that, does he? So, yeah, no, I will take it.
James, any thoughts on atmosphere?
It was hard for me to do this section. I don't know why my brain just couldn't connect on how to actually write something down to do with this story in terms of theme and mood. So what I did is I just kind of went back to basics and tried to remind myself, tried to make links between Resident Evil that we know and Resident Evil Rose Blank or Biohazard Rose Blank. So I was thinking to myself, is it survival horror? Yes. Like, these people are surviving, they are horroring, they are murdering, there's a lot of that happening. There's a lot of biological terror, there's a lot of conspiracy, there's hidden experiments. We got Resident Evil coming out of the wazoo with this story, but it still feels its own unique, has its own unique kind of identity within it, while also kind of putting out its own identity again. Like the rose motif, I love that idea. I don't fully understand the phrase that was said, because roses die. They eventually perish. And there was a phrase, there was a saying that Alma kept saying about becoming more or whatever. I was like, I don't see how that connects to a rose.
Yes, it felt like the way that was written, it was just like, this is a really important moment, so much so that it's going to be part of the reading for this episode. But yeah, I'm a rose absorbing everything. It's like, is that what roses do?
Right. I mean, I have a rose in my garden. You put anything near that thing, it dies immediately. It is temperamental as F. It hates anything, right? So maybe that's why she killed everybody. But yeah, and we had our protagonists, and I'll get into characters because I feel like a lot of the protagonists were not super strong in this story. But yeah, I don't have much more to say other than that. Then it has everything. It does have the ingredients of a Resident Evil piece of media and its themes and moods, and the vibe is definitely survival horror. It has everything, and at points, they really shine out, but it did go in its own direction. And I like that about it. Also, I felt like this is completely out. Like, I don't even know if this should fit here, but Selfridge's moment. It felt like a fan service creep thing in an anime, like a really annoying shonen or whatever. They'll have like just one character who's like exceedingly creepy and annoying. That's what I felt like Selfridge's character death was, and I don't think it is that important.
It felt like a guy who hated his boss once wanted to write a scene about how something happened to him. Very, very strange. The last point before we get to final thoughts is characters. Any notes on characters? Usually when we talk about anything, we talk about BOWs and characters as separate headings, but there isn't really anything to talk on BOWs, really, is there? There's a really just like one solo zombie, and then we have Rose. But we can talk about characters a little bit more if anyone has any points on characters. One of my favourite was Robert Preich. the guy who, do you know, in The Shining, he's the guy who turns up, who's like, I'm going to save you in The Shining, and then gets immediately like axed in the back. Like that is literally just like, oh guys, I'm here, and then he just dies immediately. Was genuinely laugh out loud funny. Other than that, I thought Richard Fuchs reminded me a little bit. I hate this. Well, no, actually, no, I don't hate it. Other people will hate it. Very Matt coded from the Anderson verse. The environmental guy who snuck in.
Oh yeah.
No, they don't really explain about how Emily found a bunch of information on him that was on the internet, which I guess was true. Because she's like, oh, I've looked you up and you're a speculator and all this. Maybe that was planted, or it was weird. That doesn't really add up when you know the end of the story, when he's like, actually, I'm this guy and I was in Raccoon City or whatever. Emily, for me, Steve, you're absolutely right. Like, she does actually have an arc, and that's kind of cool. But she seems a bit like a loser early into the book. Like, I want to like her, but she's trapped herself in this lab away from her daughter for some reason. She's named the AI after what her parents call her daughter. It's really strange. And it is like, I'm single mother Annette Birkin. It's very weird. James, any thoughts on characters?
So before I go into it, I want to ask a question about First Aid Sprague. Was he crazy, or like, because I was struggling on his motivations of what he did, like before he got infected by Rose. Why did he do all this?
I don't know. What's worse for me with Sprague is that as I've kind of alluded to, I don't know how the timing matches, because this takes place on October 3rd, and the Rena incident happens either October 2nd or October 1st, which means that the VR blob that is there, that has got Alma's kind of consciousness in it, has been there for like a day, maybe two, because it's implied that they got her out of Raccoon City basically in the nick of time. Like, the nuke comes very quickly afterwards, which is the early hours of October 1st. So this lab doing VR testing has been doing it like a day, and Sprague is also in that meantime kind of gone, okay, we've got this VR stuff here. Oh, the arena thing has happened. Oh, this is all my secret plan. I've put all this together. I'm going to get this guy to go get a cow, dump it in the next day. Like, it all came together exceedingly quickly. Like, they started working on it and it all went horribly wrong in like a day. It just seems insane when you think about that. But like, in terms of his kind of approach to whether or not it was a plan, I have no idea. Yeah.
Like, Steve, what do you think about Sprague?
See, I thought it was like a year on. I didn't realise it was like 2 days.
Maybe that's it. Maybe you're right, because it doesn't have a year. I'm just going, oh, it's October 2nd, and October 1st was when Raccoon City went. So maybe I'm just kind of assuming wrongly that it's 98 and it is 99. It could well be, because I guess the stock market crash doesn't happen for a few years. So maybe you're right. Maybe I'm making an assumption there. You're right.
But even then, like, what's his motivation? Like, I don't, because. Like,
he really has an odd point to make about vaccines and cows.
He really likes his gravy.
Cows are dangerous. Here's the proof.
Yeah, no, he's true. Actually, I am one with First Aid Sprague. So, yeah, to carry on, though, with characters, I just want to know, because I still don't fully understand what his motivations are. But, yeah, if I was to choose a favorite in terms of the characters, it's a toss-up between Rose and Richard. Leaning a bit closer to Richard. I loved his arc. He had a lot of steps to climb. Every step with him was realizing how messed up this situation was. And his lines showcased that, because he'd constantly joke around, and clearly the joking around later on was him he's absolutely losing his mind. Yeah. You know, but he's trying to kind of make sense of it, and he's joking around with Emily. And then, like, with Rose, although technically a silent character, they told a lot through their actions. By the end of the story, where they're trying to reach for the only light source they've ever known, I was cried.
Very sad.
Like, it is really sad. Like, it didn't feel victorious, but it felt like good writing at the same time.
Maybe the Ouroboros full circle thing is that it's Rose, right? And it's reaching for the moon, like the Reach for the Moon engine. Rose is reaching for the RE engine, something, right? There you go.
Right. Yeah, something.
Yeah.
I figured it out.
Time travel. 2001 knew about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were, Rose was trying to survive as this newborn intelligence, a new thing, and had all this trauma just immediately as well, which I found, it was just so sad. Unfortunately, a lot of the other characters were really forgettable for me. Even Emily, like, who I expected to have like the biggest hill to climb. And even though she does have her epiphany, I couldn't understand any of her stuff, anything that was going on, because it was so weird, so none of it felt earned for her. And yeah, like you said earlier, Sai, she was boring. At the beginning, she just wasn't an interesting character to want to invest into. And then as you're going through it, I barely knew anything because she was suppressing things. But it's like, man, even if you're suppressing things, you're thinking of things. Like, give us a glimpse. But maybe it's just because the author didn't know how to write women. I don't know.
Maybe.
You see boring. I see ordinary. I see mundane in a human way. That's just me.
But this is a scientist who works in the institute, a top secret institute. Like, she is the head of the department. Like, she has interest. Normal people can be interesting. She has interesting things to talk about and think about. But she never said anything that was interesting to me. Like, it could have been. I realized I'd come in from it from a different POV as well. But yeah,
that's fair. Steve, any thoughts on characters?
Where in the world is Robert Preich? Going through this podcast and hearing his life story, and now realizing there was a character in this book, and all I can think of is he's a red shirt.
Yeah,
he exists just to die. What a miserable existence. There are a lot
Simon
of names
Beach,
thrown around in this book. There are a lot of names thrown around in this book and a lot of characters, and yet a lot of them are not, in fact, relevant. Like, for example, Ulysses Alam doesn't really become anything but a BOW in all but name. Despite being literally described as a weird gaunt figure in the cow scene. Other than that, I would argue they are a little boring. Like, Fuchs, you can't get a real decent line on until later in the book. But I feel like the flashback stuff, the stuff that captivates me the most, like the weirdo stars, this Arthur House, who has clearly modeled himself after Albert Wesker, doesn't even know that Wesker was in fact like the architect of what happened in RE1 for the most part. I find that interesting. Like, Alma going through all this trauma, knowing about her life. She's called the witch because she was found under a pile of rubbish, grandfather's store. There's a lot to be thrown at, and she's the central thrust, and in one way or another is the origin of Rose, despite Sprague, the mad scientist's plan to prove vaccines don't work on everybody, but they might kill everybody, so let's make a bioweapon. My eyes are glazing over a little. Yeah, there is a lot of oddities, and this is not how I would write characters in my own prose, but I do find Emily, the normal person, who is basically Annette Birkin if she was not quite as evil, ? Interesting, and maybe it's just because I've just recently had a baby daughter, and the idea of, I'm going to go see my child, I find that sweet at the end.
I do like one last sort of note on that when we talk about the whole, hey, vaccines are potentially evil or whatever. I love that when Emily has the realization that is kind of Sprague's goal or whatever, and she tells Fuchs, they both just kind of go, what an idiot.
Yeah. I'm not saying I'm not one of these anti-vax losers. Don't worry. I'm not agreeing with the man. It's an interesting take he has.
Yeah. I thought, no, absolutely. I just thought it was really funny that then the book just called him out on it as well. And so that felt like the author being like, don't be like this moron. So appreciate that. All right, let's wrap this up. What are our final thoughts on Rose Blank? Did we enjoy it? Are we glad we did it? I, for one, am glad we did it, even though it was really, really strange. It was really fun to do something that A, is this unique, and B, is just like this thing that nobody has talked about. Not just for our own, like, patting ourselves on the back. You know, when somebody looks up Rose Blank, we might show up on the Google Analytics, as I talked about earlier. We might turn up on the search engine a little bit higher, whoop-de-doo. But, like, it's just cool that we've done something unique like this and filled in a really unique gap that I never would have assumed that we would have ever... I don't think I would have ever looked at this otherwise, if not for the podcast. So it was really fun, and I enjoyed it overall, sitting and talking about it, despite the fact that it is kind of messy. Like, the end's a bit of a whimper for me, and I didn't really understand sort of the last couple of chapters, but the cool insights that it gives us into Raccoon City, or that writer's interpretation of Raccoon City. And even if Emily and company might be a little bit boring, just being able to spend a little bit of time with Umbrella employees in their sort of day-to-day was something that we feel like we've asked for a long time. So realising that actually it's been out there this entire time was really neat. Steve, how do you feel about Rose Blank overall? Did you have a good time?
Yeah, I would say that it was, while I wouldn't say it was peak or anything like that, it was an enjoyable experience. It was something new. Felt like fiction from... I've read the original novel, of Parasite Eve, and that was also a Japanese to English translation. And that's emphasis on heavy science and weird body horror. Kind of, it brought that back to mind, which is pretty good. I enjoyed that book. I enjoy this one. Just takes a few goes because my brain's not as good at parsing second to... It's like 2 or 3 times translated over, so it's a little bit odd. But that being said, it's also more unique than traditional Resident Evil fan fiction. Like, I cannot hit the point home enough that this is mostly original characters in a mostly original story, as opposed to just blatant wish fulfillment crap. And that in its own, that gets like, you know, that's like several tiers above traditional fan fiction for me, because there are no Weskers. There are no Redfields. There is a mention of T-Virus, but that an umbrella, but it could literally be any virus in any fictional corporation. It could be the Facehugger and Weyland-Yutani. Doesn't matter in that sense. And that's pretty good. If you're in this for like a zombie apocalypse story, though, you're going to be lacking. It's more about the twisted science and philosophy that this writer's trying to get across. Yeah. So bear that in mind. You will not be getting any of your Stars Alpha team or your Albert Wesker or any of that.
Yeah, totally fair. Actually, like, there's no sort of like, this isn't and to each their own, but that kind of fan fiction where it's like, I'm the self-insert character in a Resident Evil story. Like, it doesn't have that vibe at all. And the stuff that it does handle in terms of pre-existing Resident Evil canon is done so in a way that assists its storytelling, not just for the sake of it. Like, the use of Raccoon City, obviously we talked about being overplayed. That is one aspect for sure. But like, it fits here. It's fine. Like, it doesn't... We're going back there in a memory. We're not just going back there for the sake of it and setting a new story there. And yeah, doing... I was also there, me, the writer.
It could be anywhere that's a nightmare zone.
Well. Yeah, totally that as well. And in terms of the canon aspect of it, we haven't really talked about this. Technically, you could say this is grey canon because it does not really interfere with anything whatsoever. So if you wanted to treat this as a canon thing, and at the very least, it can be absolutely canon to the SD Perryverse. But in terms of further than that, you may well do that because there is nothing to stop you. Like, it doesn't outright interfere with anything else. James, what are your final thoughts on Biohazard Rose Blank?
Yeah, I just want to echo what you just said there, Si, with the grey canon is my favorite kind of canon because it promotes questions, and you know I like my canon as well, like with stuff. But yeah, grey canon is super interesting because it just gets people asking questions and building and expanding. So that's one thing I really like about Rose Blank. It delivers this really chaotic, haunting dive into horror, esoteric again, but super gripping at really key points. It's got such good body horror in it, and especially at the end, incredible emotional weight. even if some of the pacing and the clarity can stumble a bit when it comes to the POVs and stuff. Yeah, it's flawed, but it's like it's also up. I think it holds true. You can hold it next to anything else that is Resident Evil, and I think it holds up. You can hold it up to that and go, yeah, this is the standard. And in some respects, it can go beyond that too. Yeah, we've had our qualms about it, but I mean, we've had podcasts where we've just for 2 hours done nothing but shit on a show, or whatever, and we have not done that with this, and that's incredible for a fanfic, for somebody that's in the grey canon. So yeah, big respect to Aizawa for Rose Blank and for giving it to us, because yeah, it has been a great journey, and I've really enjoyed reading it.
Indeed. Well, nothing else remains for me but to thank the panel, our contributors, and our community. Join us on the First Aid Sprague Discord server to hear the show early, and check out our merch store or our Patreon to support the show. Don't forget that these and our social media links can be found at faspragepod.com. You can listen to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all good podcasting apps, and if you like what you hear, please do leave us a review where you can and spread the good word. In the next episode, we'll be crossing off one of the last unplayed Resident Evil games from the podcast list. It's also one of the last games before the series did its soft reboot in 2017. I'm of course talking about Claire Redfield's other prison island adventure and the return of Barry Burton with Resident Evil Revelations 2. Thank you to the panel. You can follow the Pueblo people individually on Blue Sky. I'm at Cy White. Steve is at FB Steve, and James is at Moist Owlet OFF. And finally, thank you for listening, and have a good week. Oh, what a great email to finish the podcast with. Praise the moth. My Emperor moth eggs are on the way.
All right.
Well, that's good, because I'm going to sort out their little place where they live. Can't think of the word. Like tomorrow, so that's perfect. Tank. There you go. That's the word I can think of.
The moth tank.
Moth tank.
Are you going to get Are you going to get a nice pre-rendered background from RE2 and just put it in a photo at the back of the tank?
Oh my God, Steve, that's such a good idea. I should put Birkin's lab as a printout, shouldn't I? That's so funny.